This is Unit 1, Lesson 6, Adding and Subtracting Polynomials. All you really have to remember is what are like terms, like this blue and this pink. They can't combine, they're not like terms. This could be one of the fastest videos I've got so far. We only have one slide. As we previously learned, we can only add or subtract like terms. The biggest problem area that students have here is positive and negative signs. So today we're going to practice distributing a negative sign into the terms inside a bracket. Example 1, simplify, and remember to ask yourself what is touching the bracket. So I'm going to explain that here. So our first one is a negative outside the brackets and an M inside the brackets. To simplify, all we have to do is we want to make it simplify means kind of make it simple, right? I don't want the extra brackets in there. I want to drop off those brackets. So all that happens here is when I drop off the brackets, it becomes a negative M. And that's because this was a positive M inside the brackets. When you don't have a sign, you assume a positive, and a negative times a positive make a negative. So we get a negative M. Next one is negative M plus 2. So for negative M plus 2, we've got a binomial in the brackets. So this negative sign has to be multiplied into the M, that's a positive M, but I'm going to multiply it by a negative. So it's going to give me a negative M, just like it did in the previous example. But I also have to multiply this sign by this sign. So that positive 2 that was there is now going to become a minus 2, a subtract 2, a negative 2. How about for C? Again, the negative gets distributed inside. So the negative goes to the M. That was a positive M. So negative times a positive M is negative M. And negative times a negative 2, or minus 2 subtract 2, we get a plus 2. Two negatives make a positive. All right, next one. Same thing, but this time my M, for the first time, I have a negative M instead of a positive M. So a negative times a negative, we distribute it in. We multiply it in. Negative times a negative is going to give me a positive M. And then that negative in front also has to go to the plus 2. So a negative times a positive, that's a negative 2. So you see that we're distributing here in the instructions here, distributing. If I had a stack of papers and I was standing in front of the class and I passed them out to everyone, I would be distributing the papers. So I'd go from one stack of papers goes to everybody. Everyone gets a piece of paper, it's distributed. So this negative in front of, for part E here, the negative in front, because it's in front of a bracket, has to get distributed into everything in the bracket. And that's why we ask ourselves, what is touching the bracket? Since the negative is touching the bracket, it has to go into everything in the bracket. So we start with an equal sign always. Negative times negative M gives us a positive M. Negative times negative 2 gives us a positive 2. So that is basic distribution of a negative sign. Example 2, simplify by removing the brackets first and then collecting like terms. So as you can see, some of them have this negative sign in the middle, and we're going to have to distribute that in just like we just did. But now it's a little harder because we have some extra stuff happening before we get to that negative sign. So first is an equal sign here. Now, what's in front of my first bracket? What's in front here? Nothing, which means an invisible plus sign, or an invisible positive 1 even, if you want to be specific. So it's just a positive sign. Positive signs aren't going to change anything. So when there's nothing in front of a bracket, you just drop the brackets. That's going to be x plus 2. That's all. This bracket, the second bracket, has a negative in front of it. So this has to be distributed in. So we're distributing to the right. Okay, we're always distributing the signs to the right. If you remember in a previous example, I always told you if we had 6m minus 2m plus 5m minus 7m, for example, I told you that the sign has to go with the term. So this is a 6m and this is a plus 5m. So the sign that's just to the left of the number has to go with the term. So we're doing the same thing here. The sign that is in front of the bracket here, let me highlight it, the sign that's in front of the bracket has to go with everything inside the bracket. So negative times 2x is negative 2x, and a negative multiplied into this positive 5, a negative and a positive, give me a negative 5. So when I look at this line, there are some like terms here. I'm going to collect my letters first, my x's first. Remember, alphabetical order first. So I've got an x and a negative 2x. So that's x minus 2x. And then for my constants, I have a plus 2 and a minus 5. They go together. So plus 2, subtract, minus, take away 5. Now my next line is I collect my x's, x minus 2x. So if you have 1x and then you take away 2x's, what are you left with? You only have a negative x left. And then 2 minus 5 is going to be a negative 3. Okay, let me erase this middle stuff here. Let's go on to the next one. Now might be a good time to press pause and try this. Do you understand? Do you catch it now? Do you understand how we distribute into a bracket? So in front of this bracket right here, I have nothing, which means it's an invisible plus 1. So those are nice to have when you have nothing in front of a bracket because it means you get to just drop the brackets. So, and you can write that down on your handout. When there's nothing in front of the first bracket, the first one has nothing in front of it, you just drop off the brackets. So we're going to just drop them. We're going to just ignore them. Nothing's going to change. We have a negative 3a minus 5. Okay, now we're not quite as lucky with our second bracket. In front of our second bracket, we have a negative sign. So we have to distribute, just like we did in the questions above, the negative gets distributed in here and in here. It does not get distributed backwards this way. That's not what happens. It doesn't get distributed backwards. It only gets distributed to the numbers that are coming after it up until the bracket. If I had a number after the bracket, let's say I had a plus 3 here, I would not distribute the negative to the plus 3 because it's outside of the bracket. Again, this goes back to, if you look back at the top of the instructions here for example 1, what is the touching the bracket? So we're only talking about brackets right here. We're not talking about anything outside of a bracket. So let me erase all this. Okay, so back to our, oops, I'm going to erase this plus 3. Back to our question here. We distribute the negative in, that becomes a plus 2a, and distribute the negative to the positive 1, and that's a minus 1. Now we collect our like terms. Collect like terms. I collect my a's first. So here's an a and here's an a. So let's put those down first. I've got a negative 3a plus 2a. Now it doesn't matter if you decided to put the 2a first and then the minus 3a. I usually just write them down in the order they're showing up from left to right, but you could have also put 2a minus 3a. That's also correct. Now for the constants, I have a minus 5 and a minus 1. Remember, this sign goes with the 1. That's a minus 1. So I have to take the sign with it. So that's going to, I'm just going to write those down. That's a minus 5 and a minus 1. Now I collect my like terms. These are like terms here. Negative 3a plus 2a. So there's negative 3 a's. You add 2 a's. You still are in the whole 1a minus a. You can put a 1 if you want. It's an invisible 1. You don't need it to be there. I'm going to erase that. Whoops. Put the negative back in though. Okay. Now our next one are the constants. We've got negative, let me make that blue. We've got negative 5 minus 1. Negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. So there's our answer. We cannot put those two together and all of a sudden get, if you took a negative a minus 6 and get, I don't know, negative 7a or something. Remember, those are unlike terms. We cannot put them together. They are not the same. This represents something. It's a variable. I don't know what it represents. I haven't been told to sub in anything yet. I don't know what it is. So I can't put it together with the negative 6 until I determine what that variable is, but for now I'm leaving it in A. One more. We've got a negative in front of the first bracket. We haven't had that yet. In front of our first bracket so far have been positives, but we've practiced that up here in these questions. We had negatives in front of all of these up here. So we know what to do. We're going to take that negative and we're going to bring it inside the 2b squared and the negative 7. and then it stops. The negative goes into these two, and then it stops. The bracket stops it. Then we have a plus sign. It's going to go into these brackets here. So what is touching the bracket? It means what is to the left of the bracket. You can add that onto your handout if you want. You can write what is touching the bracket to the left. So it's just here. This plus sign, we're working towards the right, so we're going in this direction. We're not taking the plus sign and pushing it backwards. So our first line, we bring the negative in. Negative distributed into 2b squared is negative 2b squared. And negative distributed into a negative 7 or subtract 7 or minus 7, take away 7, plus 7. Now we have a positive, so we stop. This is my stop here, right? I stop distributing that negative in once I get there. Now I have a plus sign. I'm going to start again. The a positive is great. A positive means nothing's going to change because a positive times a negative is still this sign, it's a negative. And a positive times a positive is still this sign, it's a positive. So really, when we have a positive in front of a bracket, we can distribute it in, but we can also just drop the brackets because the plus sign is not going to change anything. So I can just drop the brackets, ignore this because it's not going to change anything, and make it, let me do it the other way though. So I'll just do it the longer way first actually. So let's think of it as distributing the plus sign in, just to prove to you that I'm not making this stuff up. A plus sign times a negative is a negative, so that would be a negative 3b squared. And then I distribute the plus, it has to go to everything, right? Those papers, they have to get distributed to everybody. So that positive sign, when I distribute it into the plus 4, it's going to stay positive and a positive, make a positive 4. Now, like terms, let's start with the b's. Here's a b squared and here's a b squared. They match exactly because they're both b squareds. So that means I have negative 2b squared minus 3b squared. And now let's look at the constants. This is a 7 and this is a 4. They're both positives. So there's a plus 7 and a plus 4. Remember to show your work. If you don't show your work, I assume you just looked up the answers, okay? And maybe you did it all in your head, and that's great if you can. But right now, I need to see that you can do it the way I'm showing you how to do it. So we collect like terms. The b squareds go together. Negative 2b squared minus 3b squared means negative 5. And then b squared is unchanged. That stays b squared. We're just changing the coefficients. And next is the constants. 7 and 4 is 11. So we've taken that whole kind of complicated looking question and we have all of this and we've kind of dwindled it down into these two pieces right here. Don't be confused when the text says add the opposite. Sometimes it does. It would have questions just like this, but the instructions would say simplify by adding the opposite. Don't worry about that. Some of you may have talked about that in elementary school, what adding the opposite means, and that's fine if that does make sense to you, great. But you don't need to worry about that instruction. It just means do what we're doing right here. It just means simplify, remove brackets, collect like terms. That's what it means. So don't worry about adding the opposite. That's it for today.